Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's main event featuring brother versus brother. In the red corner, from Indianapolis, Indiana, an ER doctor, a Christian, a Republican, Dr. David Blank. And in the blue corner, hailing from San Francisco, California, a computer scientist, an atheist, a Democrat, Dr. Doug Blank. Now it's time for the Blanks to rumble!
It is December 2nd, 2020. Welcome to another edition of Blank versus Blank. Today we're talking about current events 1 month after the election. Stay tuned.
So, as you pointed out, it's been almost a month since the election. This is December 2nd. The election was November 3rd on a Tuesday. And we're in a state that I don't think the country has necessarily ever been in before. How would you describe our current situation?
Actually, I don't think it's much different than the Bush versus Gore. I think it was the 1st or 2nd of December when that case was finally settled. And that was actually, Bush didn't start putting together his transition team until December. So that case also, the hanging chads went on for a full month as well.
Well, I don't know if that's exactly right. I mean, it seems like there was a time where I think half the money that was available for the transition was released to both candidates. And I believe that happened shortly right after the election. So the transition had already begun. Gore had already started prepping, and I think he was getting security updates and all of that. He was probably getting ready to announce or was preparing a cabinet and things like that.
I guess the question was Bush getting that same courtesy.
So yeah, I think they were both getting the updates.
Yeah, and that might be true. And of course, the big difference is that election was hanging on a single state and a literal, handful of votes. It was a difference between just a couple of thousand votes at most. Whereas this time around, there are multiple states and tens of thousands of votes that would all have to be changed. And it might even be hundreds of thousands of votes over multiple states, which is unlikely to happen.
I actually agree with you that waiting until the states are certified, that doesn't bother me that much. I wish and hope in the future that the states can certify those as quickly as possible, so that if there is anything suspicious that would come up, it could then be, worked through the proper channels. But I mean, we haven't seen anything like that. We haven't seen, contrary to what the president and his legal team is saying, there's not been any widespread fraud. There hasn't been dumps of votes in the middle of the night. There's been no evidence to that.
Right. And that's I guess the flip side of that coin is there has been some fraud. There has been some evidence of errors. Just I'm trying to think whose recount it was, whether it was Wisconsin's or Georgia's, where they found 10,000 votes that had not been counted. So there are errors that were uncovered. They're just not of the magnitude that are, I think, unlikely to change anything.
Right. And that is a little bit scary that you can find 10,000 votes, here and there. But that's the way the election system has always been run, right? The only way to make it more precise would be to say have a unique voting ID card, and I don't think anybody, I don't think any Republicans would want that kind of a unique ID card that you have to use to vote.
It's called a driver's license.
Well, driver's license you can get if you pass a driver's test, but I don't think you want to make driving a prerequisite in order to vote.
No, but you just have to have some proof of, you need to have some type of proof of citizenship. You have to, there are rules that you follow. We talked about this in the election 2020 vlog. And
Yeah.
I think overall things, they worked just like they were laid out to work. And like I said, I don't think there's widespread fraud. And I think that things are going to play out. Court cases will play out. And so far they have, and not in Trump's favor. And we'll see. He just filed another couple. And those will go to the courts, and we'll see where the chips fall. Now, I guess the bigger question, and I would ask for people who I know who still think that, the election was stolen, is, if they're trying to make the case that because people dropped off their ballots in collection boxes instead of somewhere else, and that the law didn't specifically say you could do that, that we shouldn't count their votes. And I don't know that that is really where you want to go. You don't want to take somebody who is legally voting and they think they're doing what's allowed, and then after the election you come back and say, well, we're not going to count any of your votes because some bureaucrat made a mistake. And so I think my own personal feeling is, if somebody comes up later and says, yeah, in that state, their laws or their constitution don't allow that, then you have to find some other way to get around that so that people's votes still count if they attempted to do the right thing.
Yeah, that is not just your opinion. I think a majority of people in the country feel that way. However, like you say, you probably have some friends that don't necessarily feel that way. There's probably a good, maybe a majority of Republicans even that are, talking like they're not going to stand for this. Biden would never be the proper president. He will always be seen under some kind of suspicion that something happened illegally. And there are people talking about, I heard somebody say today, this was, I think it was a radio show that Trump had called into, and he said, and maybe we can find the clip and play it so I don't misquote him, but I think he said that he's prepared to die for this cause, that to make sure that Trump wins, he is willing to die.
Yeah, Julia says that Gore never acknowledged Bush.
Oh, that's not true. He conceded the day after the Supreme Court made their ruling.
Oh, in that. Oh, I see. No, she was trying to write me a little note and I couldn't understand. There are still plenty of Democrats that say that Bush did not win that election. So that's the problem you run into when you get into the courts.
Well, I don't know anybody that's saying that he didn't win because there's no way to know because the vote counting stopped. I think their legal team, the Gore legal team, made some mistakes.
Yeah.
Like the thing that they ruled was that you can't just pick two counties and recount those. If you're going to do a recount, you have to do it all. And so I think that the ruling from the Supreme Court was that this wasn't equal, and so it should just stop. And so then there wasn't time, and so they basically ruled that Bush was the winner.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of got off topic a little bit there. Might need to edit some of that out, but
yeah, but I do
um,
think that the ruling was I mean, you never want the Supreme Court picking your president, right?
no, but here's the thing, and here's where it comes back to the discussion is the law of voting. And if you don't follow the law, then those votes don't count. And so if a state has certain rules about how you collect votes, how you count the votes, and how you go about tabulating them, if somebody does not follow the law, then in the court system, there's potentially some repercussions for that. Those votes might be disallowed because they were illegal votes. The process was illegal. And so that's where we're at right now, is Trump and his team trying to make the case that 200,000 votes should be tossed out and not counted because the process violated their state law.
Yeah.
And I think you and I think most people would also agree that, yeah, that may be illegal. Maybe you have to rehold that state's election again or something. You can't just not count innocent people's votes because the person who collected or tabulated their votes didn't do it right, but everybody thought they were.
Yeah. Well, except as you noted, for a few individual cases here and there, somebody filling in their dead mother's ballot, or these are one-off things that there's been no evidence of 10 or 20 votes even that were done in improper manner, filled out by somebody else or anything like that. There's been no evidence because the law is pretty, the penalty for breaking that law is pretty steep. It's like 5 years in prison for, doing something like that. So there's been no evidence of that. But the idea that only legal votes count begs the question of, well, how do we decide what's legal? So, for example, one of the things that still is up in the air, and who knows where this is going to go, but is the idea that each state's legislatures pick the what do you call them?
The electors.
The electors, and then the electors go and they place their votes. Well, there are states like Pennsylvania that I lived in just 6 months ago, and they have laws about how that happens. But there is a theory going around that state legislatures can break their own rules, that they don't have to follow the laws that they create. And that's basically, very similar to what Trump has been saying, is that, that he doesn't have to follow these particular laws because he's the chief law enforcer. So,
yeah. But when you get to the courts, that would not stand. I mean,
well, I don't know. If it gets to the Supreme Court, then it probably would stand, because the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, says it's up to the states. And if the state legislatures feel like they can break their own laws, it's not us to step in and say that they can.
I think they would say if the state has laws, then the legislators have to follow their own laws. States make the rules, but then they have to play by their rules. You can't just change your rules at the last second.
You
I can't imagine any judges. Yeah, that sounds like a conspiracy theory that's going nowhere.
Well, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's a law theory, a theory of law. And you could see that it would be reasonable for the Supreme Court to say that we're not going to rule on states' whether or not states are breaking their laws. And you could imagine that a state legislature really could say, well, we're not going to do what we just passed a law a year ago. We're going to change that law, even though, usually, but not always, there are retroactive laws that you can put in effect.
Yeah. No, I see this going nowhere.
Well, I hope so. I mean,
No, that sounds like crazy talk from
well,
somebody.
I think we should be very careful about what we call crazy talk and conspiracy theory and what isn't. I mean, that's
Trump has been writing the governor of Georgia right now and telling him he should override his Secretary of State and just kind of take over the election and decide what's counted and what's not. And the governor of Georgia has said, no, we have laws here in Georgia, and the governor is not allowed to interfere with the election, which I believe is true. And so that's, I mean, if the governor did step in and override things, he'd be violating the law, and courts would overrule that because even the governor is not above the law.
Yeah. Well,
Nobody is.
I think you or I are on the right page, on the same page.
Yeah.
And I hope that if you have any friends out there, Republicans, that believe that Biden didn't do anything. So there was no action on his part. The people voted, and there's been no evidence of anything being swapped around. And you're right, court cases can continue, and we hope that there's nothing weird that happens. But now the question is, what happens next? So it's sort of hard to imagine Trump conceding, don't you think?
Oh, he will. So the Electoral College is meeting, what, December 20th? Is that their deadline?
It's either the 14th or the 20th.
Yeah, so that'll be coming up soon. And he's already said that if the Electoral College rules against him, then of course he'll concede.
I don't think that's what he said. I think what he said was, if the Electoral College votes him out, he will leave.
Maybe. I don't remember how they asked the question, but yeah, either way. So one question I have for you, to kind of wrap this up a little bit. I think overall we're exactly where we said we were going to be when we did our vlog before. We're a month out. Cases are winding down, but there were plenty of court cases, and the election actually was closer than I think either of us probably anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
And the polling was way off. But in the end, the Electoral College, I think, is going to give Biden a pretty resounding win. However, the blue wave that was supposed to come through did not, and so we've still got Senate races that are pending, and I feel sorry for the people of Georgia, because I heard a guy on the radio today say that he gets a text message every 2 minutes from some group somewhere about voting for the Senate races. But overall, unless something amazing happens, I think Republicans are going to keep the Senate. May only be one vote, but I think they've already got 50. They only need one of those two to keep their majority. Democrats, who anticipated picking up a lot of seats in the House, lost seats. There was another one in California that was just decided today for a Republican instead of a Democrat. So the kind of take-home message in my mind is that people were tired of Trump's antics. I have plenty of friends who are middle-of-the-road Republicans, and I have quite a few middle-of-the-road Democrats, moderate Democrats, who just said, I can't vote for him. I can't vote for him. not policies or anything else. They were just fed up with Trump and his tweets and his behavior, and went to vote him out. But otherwise, they still voted for Republicans. And across a lot of states, Republicans actually picked up a lot of seats in state legislatures, which is the thing that's going to have the longer impact, because we're getting ready to redraw district lines, and whoever controls the legislature gets to do that. So what do you think was the reasoning behind that? Did progressives hurt Democrats? Did talk about defunding the police steer people down the ballot towards Republicans?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I don't think that there wasn't a blue wave. What we were talking about with the blue wave was that on election night there would
Right.
be a red. Uh,
Early voting would show Trump in the
yeah.
lead, but as they counted more ballots that were mailed in,
Right. So I
Biden,
think they
it
called
would
it
shift.
the red mirage followed by the red wave that would come in through the night. And like
Yeah.
you say, that's exactly what happened. But regarding the big difference between polling data and what actually happened was huge. Like you say, the people thought that there was a real chance that it was going to be a blowout down ballot for the Democrats, both in the House and in the Senate. But there wasn't. Part of that, I think, is that, like you say, people just didn't want to vote for Trump. And a lot of Republicans didn't. But when they were polled, they didn't necessarily give a straight up answer about what they were going to do. And so it was pretty hard to have polling data that accurately reflected what people did. But yeah, I think you may be right that things like defund the police and Black Lives Matter really did hurt the Democrats. And I think it's a shame because, like we talked about on our defund the police um, video, that was the phrase, but reasonable people could come to the idea and belief that we really do need some police reform. Now, do I think that if protesters had come up with the phrase police reform rather than defund the police, that there would have been a lot of Democrats that won? No, because I don't think the the resistance to defund the police and the resistance to Black Lives Matter have anything to do with the police. I think it still has a lot to do with people having biases, and that we still there were a majority of white people that voted for Republican, and I think it's been like that for a long time, decades and decades and decades. I don't think the majority of white people have ever voted for a Democrat.
I don't know if that's true. I think one thing I'd like to get your opinion on real quick before we wrap up. Trump actually got more Black people and Hispanic people to vote for him this time than last time, despite all the cries of racism and that he talks, so poorly about immigrants. In my own mind, I think I just see that as, you can't count any group as just some big monolith where everybody thinks the same. There are clearly a lot of minority people who benefited from the economy through the first 3 years of Trump, and I think they kind of, his message from that standpoint kind of resonated with them. And I think as far as Hispanics go, most Hispanics are actually just born and raised here in the United States, but there's a fair number of them as well that are immigrants or within a generation of immigrants. and they've all come from places where they were, essentially refugees from Venezuela or Cuba or El Salvador through Mexico. And so they've all left countries that had socialism or dictators or corruption in their government. And at least my own feeling is a lot of the progressive talk about moving our government to be more like the governments that they just fled kind of steers some people away.
No Democrat is talking about making the U.S. government more like any of the countries that you just mentioned. I don't think
All right.
that's not what happened. And you have to remember that just because Trump barely got any black votes or any Hispanic votes 4 years ago, and he got a little bit more, I don't think that is really a big trend to follow. So I don't think you want to read too much into that.
I think you need to look at your numbers, but keep believing that. But yeah, so moving forward, how do you think government is going to work? Democrats have a narrow majority in the House. Republicans looks like they're probably going to maintain a razor thin majority in the Senate. And so far, the people that Biden is picking for his cabinet seem to be well-tread Washington insiders that are not rocking the boat in one direction or another. They're pretty middle of the road, moderate kind of people. So you think we're going to see any big shifts one way or the other, or you think the ship is going to try to get more even keeled back to like the Obama years?
Well, I don't think the Obama years were very even keeled. I mean, Mitch McConnell, hasn't really done too much in the Senate for years, except get judges passed. So do I see that's going to change if we have a Republican-controlled Senate? No, I don't think there's going to be much that can happen. Although one of the silver linings that you saw with Trump was, um, you know, Republicans didn't really mind when he was signing the executive order, or moving money from the Pentagon to build his wall. People couldn't stop him. So in some ways, I think that is encouraging that even with a blocked Senate, that maybe Biden can get some things done.
Yeah. And Mitch McConnell and Biden have known each other for decades.
Oh, I
And
don't think that matters.
I don't know. It may they may find some common ground on some issues. I think
You
there's going to be
always say that. You always think that. You were never right. Do you remember when you said that Trump was going to work with Democrats?
They made it awfully hard to work with them.
No, they did not. They did not.
You not remember that they impeached him after they got a special counsel to investigate him?
Trump could have been reelected so easily if he had just tipped his hat to some middle of the ground program or Democrats. He would have been reelected in a moment.
But I don't think it was that. I think if Melania had thrown away his phone, he'd have done better. But we will see. We will see.
I want to say one last thing, though, as we look towards the future, and that is if Trump doesn't concede and he claims that he's going to run for president in 2024, I just think that is going to destroy the Republican Party, don't you think?
That's 4 years away. That's a long, long time.
Well, if he makes himself the kingmaker of the Republican Party, that seems like it's going to be hard for the Republicans.
Yeah, we'll find out. Like I said, he next to Joe Biden, he got the second most votes of any candidate in history. So we'll see where these guys, if they meet again.
I don't think Trump's going to be remembered for that. He's going to be remembered as the president that never conceded.
Yeah. Or the guy who brought peace to the Middle East. We will see.
Right.
We will see. Well, thanks again. And we will see you next time on Blank versus Blank.
See ya.